attacks across the entire state. And we're taking sort of the NATO mentality of an attack against one organization within the state should be seen as an attack against the entire state. We want to make sure we're coming to the collective defense of the entire community. So if Cochise County sees a cyber attack, we can take that information and share it across all of the other counties, all of the other cities, all of our partners everywhere to better defend ourselves. And then on top of that, being able to partner with organizations, as Michael mentioned, like the National Guard, to do proactive vulnerability assessments, as well as potential light pen testing and responding to cyber attacks as they happen if they are impactful. A combined effort between all of our organizations coming together to respond to attack, to make sure we can get these organizations back up and running and get them defended against attacks as best as we possibly can.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you.
Jerry, tell us what CISA does to support elections in Arizona.
So much like Angie said, where Michael, Ryan, and Angie went to all the elections facilities across the state of Arizona, I went to almost all of the counties across Arizona and performed a cybersecurity assessment and compiled the results and brought them back to the elections partners. We did focus on the elections and recorders' offices and processes from cybersecurity and identified risks and notified them of what the potential risks are and maybe some ideas on how to mitigate those risks. And then on top of that, CISA as an organization, I also have a protective security advisor for the state of Arizona, and he has gone to all the elections entities and done physical security assessments as well to understand, run, hide, fight, and understand the physical security of the buildings. And then we also have and he provides a report as well of mitigations and things like that. And recently, CISA has brought on an election security advisor whose purpose is all things elections. She is an elections expert, and she is with us today. Susan Lastly, please stand up and say hi to everybody. And, I got several links up here to show CISA has a lot of focus on a lot of areas within critical infrastructure, but elections is obviously very important and very high level. So we provide a lot of information for elections facilities and elections people. And so these links up here will also be shared over on the Secretary of State website for your access. And there's a lot of good articles and information for elections entities, or if you just want to better understand things that can be done at an elections facility for its defense and protection. And let's see. Yep, and something a little bit, so we did the elections offices, but we also did a cybersecurity assessment of the Secretary of State's office also. And we're going to be performing another one of those as well. That's it.
Absolutely, yeah. It's really important for us at the Secretary of State that we sort of set the example for the counties. We want to make sure that we're sort of practicing what we preach, and that includes getting assessments and finding out where we may be vulnerable and securing those. Thanks so much, Jerry. And Susan for being here. We're sorry we couldn't fit you on the stage, but I didn't want to put you in timeout, so. All right, I think, yep, I went too far. Dana, give us some insight into some of the procedural safeguards that are built into the elections process.
So we put seals on all of our election equipment, sometimes port blockers as well. No matter what, whenever we're around equipment, election wear, e-pulse, any of our tech, it's always in a two-party system, whether it's equipment or ballots. We have security cams on all of our processes. Those are recorded, and even on some of our other functions, we have live feeds out. This helps minimize the amount of foot traffic we have in our spaces for observers. So if I can put it on live stream, then I don't have to worry about the person trucking down to Coolidge, which is important. And then we're always available to answer questions and try to ensure that our processes are as transparent as possible.
Great, thanks, Dana. I want to take a minute to just thank Dana for being here because she represents election officials around the state that we know are doing extremely important work in the face of a lot of threats to their personal safety as well as their family's safety and well-being. So we'll move on to Nate. I lost my place because that's what I do. Nate, as IT support for the county election and recorder for a county election recorder office, explain to us what it takes to maintain election day security and operations.
Oh, good question. So Maricopa County is big. We're about 65% of the state of Arizona as far as population is concerned. We've got about 4.6 million registered voters, 4.6 million residents with about 2.4 million registered voters. And unlike some other counties in the state, we actually have quite a few resources that we take advantage of when it comes to securing our vote and our elections processes. One of those is in our tabulation facility, we call it McTech. There's actually a command center where we try and shove 50 people into a room that's not designed for 50 people, and we use that space to collaborate during election time periods. And we put as many people in there as possible, from IT folks to supervisory individuals, and we also have our partnering organizations like CISA, like the FBI, like the Sheriff's Office, and we also have other partners like the ACTIC and our other vendor partners like Runbeck that we get election services from. And we use that space as a place that we can collaborate and get real-time information from all of these different highly prioritized resources that we use for elections every single year. And obviously coming up this election year, 2024 is a big one. We have a presidential election in November. If you didn't know that, but if you're from Tempe or Cave Creek, I believe right now, you are going to have 2 ballots in the mail if you are a registered early vote participant. You're also going to get another ballot from our presidential preference election, so you're going to get those mailed out to you sooner than later. Please get those ballots, if you're early voting, back to us as soon as possible. Do not wait till Election Day. That causes lots of problems with processing and all of that. And I will be around after this if you have any questions about the process in Maricopa.
Thanks so much, Nate. I do just want to take a minute, since Nate brought up election dates, to advise everyone that the primary election for this year did change. Does anybody know the new date? July 30th. Thank you to the person who told me this. Okay. Lester, you work with Nate, so I do want to go a little deeper. Tell me what role you think social media plays in terms of risk for elections.
Yeah, 100%. So being part of Maricopa County, we're obviously in the news a lot. One of the things that my security team has discovered is social media is both a threat vector as well as source of intelligence. And so we have unfortunately experienced firsthand that what's posted on social media is not only a potential indicator of threat from a cybersecurity perspective, but it's also a potential kinetic threat. And so we have seen, unfortunately, examples where social media is also being used as a source of planning and intelligence, where we have had people use social media to coordinate caravans, stake out certain key locations, elevating the level of physical risk to our residents and the community as a whole. And so unfortunately, part of our move forward in terms of what our incident response and how we're preparing for the 24 election cycle is in large part based off of what we observe on multiple media channels, including social media.
Thank you. Sean, I know you wanted to talk a little bit about process-oriented thinking in the election space. Go ahead.
Yeah, so a little less practical maybe, and a little more philosophical, if you will. My role in our department is I'm the guy that sort of says, "Are we done yet?" Right. So as we're fixing issues, things that pop up, right? People tend to focus on the fires that are right in front of them, and I'll share with you a little story. I did get this cleared. So we had an important but non-critical system that had a failure during the last big election. And so a number of people stepped in and said, okay, we've got to fix this. And nobody took the time to stand back and say, okay, what about the whole system though, right? This piece broke, but we care about the whole system. So part of my role in this is to sort of take the 10,000-foot view, right? Say, what's going on with the whole system? And if we care about the whole system, where are the other possible points of failure? And so we have, as I said, we have a whole team all working on the election stuff. We all have our specialties. If you are in a team doing something like this, if some people have that kind of thought process, some people do not. If you do, use it. Speak up.
That's a great point. I know that you, Sean, have been kind of an IT professional supporting elections for a while now. Tell us a little bit about what it means to you to be part of the elections community.
So you've heard the term bottom up a number of times today. Michael stressed that. I would like to flip that table a little bit, because one of the most critical roles that Michael, Ryan, many of the other people here on this table, when we're talking bottom up, I'm at the bottom. But I'm not alone. That's where the power of what you see going on up here at this table is. And this is, I will not say unique, but it is certainly rare outside of the state of Arizona. When I talk to my counterparts in other parts of the country, they are flabbergasted, just blown away that I can pick up the phone and call someone at the state level. I can call Jerry at the federal level, and he will pick up my call, and they will help me. And I don't have the resources, the knowledge, the whatever, to handle everything that might come my way. But I do have help. I'm not alone.
That's a really important message that we try to convey to all election officials. Thanks so much, Sean.
You want in? There's
Yeah,
three ways.
like, seriously, like, hey.
The love. Everybody feel the love in the room? All right. Speaking of love, we have a particular fondness for our friend Ken Mata. Folks may or may not know that you used to have mine and Michael's job before they realized it was the work for two people, and they gave it to us. So you work for a local vendor now that supports elections. Tell me how you do election security in private sector and how it's similar or different from what you did at the Secretary of State's office.
Thank you for that. Yeah, so basically, we're part of election infrastructures, critical infrastructure ourselves, so we enjoy a lot of the same benefits. We get to work with the same communities. In case we haven't made that perfectly clear, it's a big community, right? We're talking about, the people actually performing elections, that we're talking about communications people, law enforcement, the three-letter agencies, intelligence agencies, the vendors, we're all, it's a big community of people that are protecting elections, and so we get to be still part of that and plug into that. We also enjoy a lot of the benefits of being in private infrastructure. Let me tell you too, we also follow the same four basic things that we're protecting in elections, and if we haven't made that clear to you, there's physical security, cyber security, procedural security, and public information security, or what I call objective information security, which is just about trying to make sure we can continually be transparent and put the truth out there and try to counteract a lot of the misinformation that's going out there. So, we get to use a lot of the federally provided security controls and processes. We get security assessments from our federal partners. We run a pretty great security program at our company. Physical security, we've got like a four-person armed security force at our company these days. We get physical security assessments too. Procedural security, we're watching our, auditable processes and chain of custody inside of the way we do things. And we work very closely with PR firms and the press, and try to have, tours through our company, try to be transparent, trying to combat misinformation the best we can.
Thanks, Ken. Hang on to that microphone. As a long-standing and well-respected member of the elections community, tell us what you see as the greatest threat to elections.
I might share this, I won't put words in anybody else's mouth too, but I think the common threats that we're looking for as an industry, one is misinformation. And this isn't just like misinformation spawned by foreign actors. We used to be really worried about that, about malign foreign influence into the industry. These days, we're more concerned about domestically generated misinformation that affects our industry. So, you know, my company has been thrown under the bus many times, you know. We just do what we can to do that. But also, I think the other one, I think, for us is insider threat. Right now, we're really worried about, as these vacancies happen in our industry, because it's so toxic right now, because of the death threats against our children, because it's really kind of turning into this caustic workplace. We've seen a big shift of talent away from our industry. Those holes are filled, and we're trying to make sure they're not getting filled by people with bad intent. Physical security, too. Last few years, since the misinformation spread, now we have to really watch our backs.
Thanks, Ken. All right, so we gave you all our questions, but while we've been standing here talking, my lovely assistants in the front row, who keep reminding me that I'm not advancing the slides, have provided me with a list of questions from the audience. Again, if your question doesn't get read now, please keep in mind that we are going to follow up via email as much as possible. This is that resource slide, so we want to make sure you see that again. I might have gone too far. Hold, please.
Dream job alert.
We'll just go back to well, I guess we don't have to go through the questions because you guys already have them. If at the end you guys have additional questions and you didn't get that QR code, come and find us and we'll make sure that you can submit your questions to us and we can get you an answer. So, make sure I have the right questions here. All right, this is a great one to start off with. What can we do to increase security in elections? I think we could be interpreted as the voters or members of the cybersecurity community, and I'm going to open this up. Is there a panel member that wants to start this off? Geez, you guys are always so adamant about talking. Okay, there we go.
I have my hand up, little kids table.
Can't see you down there.
I think the one thing we can do as the generic word citizenry, I guess, is I think everybody in this room maybe has more information than others, maybe in your family member households. You probably have more information than your parents or your grandparents. They're getting their information from somewhere else. So the best way, I think, is understanding what their thought processes are. Say they don't believe that elections are secure. They are hearing conspiracy theories on their source of media. Understand, be empathetic to what they have to say, but try and educate them and steer them towards more valid sources of information, and just take this seriously as you can. Elections before 2020 was a different animal, and we're kind of in an unprecedented era, I think, of elections administration at this point. So.
Thanks, Nate. Michael, go ahead.
Yeah, same thing. So I think of it with the 3 V's here, vote, volunteer, and verify. And Nate just nailed the verify portion, right? You guys know how to do research, teach people around you critical thinking, how to do their own research, how to go to original sources and prove something is true or not true. So first, vote in every single election that you're eligible to vote in, everyone, the small ones, the big ones. And then volunteer, be a poll worker, be part of the system, right? You're hackers, you understand how systems work. If you see something that doesn't seem right, talk to your supervisor. If they don't satisfy you, talk to their supervisor. If they don't satisfy you, talk to the elected official. If they don't satisfy you, then go to the police. Don't immediately jump to a conspiracy theory forum saying something is concerning to you without knowing whether or not it's an actual legitimate process.
Thank you.
Can I throw a little addendum to that?
Sir, yeah.
Yeah, I just, sort of in parallel with what you're talking about, and I'm sure we all know these people, but I found that very often I like to do my own research is code for I found a website that confirms everything I think is true.
Yeah. Actual
Absolutely.
research, right, yeah, yeah.
So in terms of trusted resources, Ken mentioned, we want to make sure you know what those are. One of these links here is to a list of local election officials. Start there. Refer to those folks. Again, CISA, Department of Homeland Security, all these places have a lot of really valuable information. Our website includes kind of myth-busting facts for you. Start there. And if we can't answer your question, we sure can point you in a direction to get an answer. All right, next question was, how often, if at all, do you have to deal with conspiracy accusations, and is it better now than from 2020? So I can answer the first part, which is always. But Dana, do you want to take this one?
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'm gonna call her.
Wow, thanks, guys. Appreciate so much. Yeah, it's daily. It's sometimes on the hour. Not only is it coming from our parties, from our communities, sometimes, it's family. It comes from every angle. What's really great is being part of a team that I have 50 full-time employees. I have another 50 election cycle temps, over 1,000 poll workers. I have a complete community in the county that supports us. And the more that those people interact with what we actually do every day, chain of custody, audit forms, sealing, the ballot boxes, the innovative GPS lock system that we use in Pinal County, understanding where your trusted sources are. Those people who are part of our process, they're part of our progress, and they're not part of our problem. So go back to those people who actually do the job, ask the hard questions, and they will be thrilled to tell you the path of enlightenment, if you shall say.
I love that. Yeah, I remember when I was working for a county just getting really excited when I had somebody call and say, hey, so I heard this rumor and I figured I might as well just call and ask you. And I was like, thank you, thank you, thank you. Michael, go ahead.
I promise I won't do this for every single one. I'm not trying to hog the mic. Here's an example. This is going to happen. People, you guys know what war driving is, right? They're gonna try and do that to polling locations. They're going to be amateurs are going to be sniffing Wi-Fi traffic and making outrageous claims. They will not know what they're talking about, and you folks do. So we can't answer everything ourselves. Feel free to, I'm blessing you on this, not that you need it, but if someone's wrong on the internet, please, well, actually them.
Brava, brava. That's great. I'm going to let Ken take this one because I think he does a really good job of explaining this. So people talk about whether voting machines are connected to the internet at any time during the election. Voting machines are not connected to the internet. What is the biggest misunderstanding, though, that people have about this that you'd like to correct?
I think the public isn't entirely aware of the definition of a voting machine. A machine that actually tabulates ballots, that counts our votes, that holds those votes, are never connected to the internet. There's also a lot of other tabulation adjacent equipment that could be connected. One would be like our networks in our offices, in our election offices that we work in. But the Secretary of State's office could get hacked and they would not be able to change a vote. Do you understand what I'm saying? The public doesn't see that. Again, I'm going to lean on you guys. You guys are a little more savvy. You start to understand the delineation between these separate, very disparate systems. We also have like poll books at the polls that may be connected to the internet, but they're not tabulating equipment. They're not actually tabulating votes. I think that's probably the biggest misconception that the public gets. They see the headline. The media doesn't help with this, right? They see a headline that says, hey, this election office was hacked. They had a virus found on their machine. Oh, the elections are insecure. Not necessarily the case.
Thanks, Ken. I knew you could handle that. I think we've still got a little bit more time. So is it more secure to vote in person or by mail? And how would you compare the systems in place to protect each? What can we tell family members who are concerned? Raise your hand if you want to take this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's Dana again.
You know, it really, I love the fact that Arizona is what I call a triple threat state. We have the ability to vote by mail, we have the ability to go vote early in person, and then we have the ability to go election day and execute our right to vote. And my job is to follow the law and make sure I do everything to secure that right. And I don't take that lightly, and nobody in this world does. So to tell you either one of the systems is better than the next, I won't do that, because I believe truly in my staff, the people who do this for a living, and the people who support us. So I would tell you, whatever makes the most sense for you, go forth, and we're going to make sure we do everything to secure it. I'm learning to be a politician.
Okay, I fibbed. Here's an analogy. Do we have any gamers here? Anyone who play video games? How often
No
is a
gamers.
launch day free of any kind of bugs? Pretty rare, right? So early access is nice. Launch day is election day. Why did you wait until the last minute? So I'm not saying that you shouldn't vote on election day. Please vote. Please vote any way that you feel is appropriate. But the more people that vote ahead of time, if there's any kind of issues on voting day, smooth things out, right? Yeah, and vote centers. If there's a problem at a location, being able to go to another location, super handy.
Thanks for that. I'm going to throw this one over to our state and federal partners. Hi, team. Do you have any concerns from non-state actors attempting to influence the elections through social media campaigns, phishing, or disinformation? No. None.
None. Everything's great.
Not a real thing.
Good. It's fine. Everything's fine.
Well, I guess I'll go first. Yes, obviously. So any amount of communicating between people, there's the potential for misinformation, there's the potential for influence campaigns. Lester talked about this, that this is both a source of threat as well as a source of intelligence. If we can get out ahead of this and understand when people are talking either about physical threats to our physical locations or to our election officials or to our elected officials, and be able to warn them of that threat and better protect them, that's fantastic for us. If we can also identify that there are talking about potential cybersecurity attacks to come after that election infrastructure or any of our other government infrastructure, that's also great for us to be able to get out ahead of it. That being said, we know, as we've heard multiple times today, that there are interesting sources of alternate facts that people are paying attention to. And we need to be very cautious about how that gets perpetrated. We know that some of these are domestically generated, some of them are generated by foreign malign influence actors, and they echo off of each other. So even if this is starting with a domestic actor, the foreign malign influence actors will pick it up and regenerate it multiple times ad infinitum, so it gets echoed across the community. And vice versa. We know that we're seeing stuff come from nation-state threat actors being echoed by the echo chamber and amplified by the echo chamber of domestic people who find a grain of truth in things that are being said, and it fits to the narrative that they want to believe, and they continue to echo it out. So absolutely something we're paying attention to, and we're trying to do our best to possibly combat this. And I'll turn it over to our federal partner to talk more.
And so another way to help combat this is communication, all right? We have a team here that we are in constant communication on these threats and at the national level as well. And so when a threat shows up one place, we make sure everybody is aware of it. Again, trying to use our trusted source channels and our trusted partners to make sure that people know what's going on, when and where, so that we can try to mitigate or kind of offset some of these problems. An example is some bomb threats that happen in another part of the country. Well, we need to notify our local folks to be ready for that, be understanding of what might happen there. And so I think communication is key, and really having a good relationship with these folks here and the hundreds of other people that deal with elections across the state of Arizona, as well as across the country, to make sure that we have lines of communication and people that we can reach out to.
Thanks so much. Kevin, go ahead.
I also wanted to give a shout out to academia here, and especially like the Stanford Internet Observatory, who our previous speaker was with. They've done some amazing research in the field. of how misinformation is carried across this great nation of ours. They've done a lot of groundbreaking work on that, and a lot of researchers are. And I just want to say that, especially they talk a lot about the impact of influencers and the spread of misinformation. And that's something we are just needing to embrace in our community. We've seen a little bit of work in several states trying to get like sports figures and music celebrities and trying to get in on and to be able to carry the message of truth and rationality into the masses, because we have a very, very small speaker, and maligned influencers have a very large megaphone, and that's one of the real problems that we're facing today in our community.
Thanks, guys. So kind of along that same stream of communication, this next question, I'm going to open it up to this panel. How can we talk productively with friends and family members who are skeptical about our state's election security? Any volunteers? Michael, they've called on you.
Michael's been voluntold.
Just read these books and just explain it all to them. It's easy.
You're fine. It's great for insomnia.
Be respectful, first off, right? Like, don't be rude or dismissive. If you want someone to completely shut down, insult their intelligence, just realize that they're being targeted by sophisticated attackers, by people that they respect and trust as well, who are telling them that things are being stolen from them. And that's deeply emotionally impactful. And you're going to be fighting an uphill battle. But it is worth fighting. Like, you can't just be like, oh, well, I'm just going to talk to my uncle anymore. Oh well.
And for a long time, that kind of was the strategy for election officials, right? Let people believe what they want to believe. We stay out of those arguments. That's up to them. But it didn't really serve us well. And we found that what serves us better is to utilize all of you as we educate you, to remind you that we want you to go out and we want you to share with people, but make sure that you're sharing accurate information. Make sure that the information you're providing is true. And if you're not sure, say you're not sure and tell them where those trusted resources are, because now you know where they are. Michael may not be able to deem you all, but I am actually a high priestess for the Universal Life Church for my friends who wanted to get married. So you are blessed to do so. Please go out and make that happen. All right, we're going to wrap things up here with one last question from our audience. To each person on the panel, what keeps you up at night between now and November? So many things. Let's start at this end. Ken, go ahead and kick us off.
What keeps me up at night, I think mostly is still the misinformation, the bad name we've been given, and seeing so many, when I got into the election industry, I was just amazed, I was astounded by the integrity of the people that I found there. It was unlike no other industry I ever worked in before. I watched them check their figures and their numbers like 4 times before they released them to the public. They went over everything very carefully. I was so impressed by that, and seeing them thrown under the bus like this it's hurtful. And you know what I mean. We're watching a lot of really good people, really smart people doing the right things for very little pay, and now they don't even have the benefit of just being ignored. Because, the good old days was like staying out of the paper was our business, staying out of the newspaper. If you don't make the newspaper during an election, you're doing great. You know what I mean? And that's, I kind of miss those days where you could just have like a nothing burger for an election,
As do we all.
And I think deepfakes is probably my biggest concern because of the speed in which they're improving and the ease of which people can create them. They need very little information as far as voice clips or video clips or photographs to create very compelling things. And all our lives are trained that what you see and what you hear is real. Well, now that's not true, because I've seen and heard lots of unreal things. And so that is probably the most scary thing that I have, is because it's hard to combat. Once that goes viral and everybody sees it and believes it, how do you go back behind them and say, no, that wasn't real, that wasn't true, that was a fake? It's really hard to get in front of that or undo that memory, because you can't unsee and you can't unhear things.
I'll say, for me, because my purview and my mission is supporting more than just the elections, it's the entirety of the state of Arizona, and we've heard numerous times over the past several weeks, both from our federal partners and others, that nation-state actors are pre-positioning themselves within our critical infrastructure and looking to take advantage of the numerous vulnerabilities that exist out there, both in our technology and in our people. And we don't have enough defense to take care of these things. We need you guys to identify the problems and to help us solve them, and we need everyone on deck for this. This is truly a community effort. We're defending truly existential level threats here that we need everyone to be able to help with. And obviously that's a lot of weight on all of your shoulders as well as mine, but it's something that if we don't stand up and rise to this task, it's truly the end of everything. So no pressure.
Yeah, I'm not going to say anything more positive to add to that, but I will say, all joking aside, and this is not hyperbole, my biggest fear is somebody's going to get killed. And so we at Maricopa County, we've had to update our incident response playbooks to reflect the fact that our elected officials have to hire physical security services. And so we've updated our protocols on if we see credible threats of a physical nature, who do we contact so that information gets to them ASAP. You know, so that's no exaggeration. And so part of my litmus for a successful 2024 election cycle is nobody getting hurt or killed, honestly. So.
Yeah, I'm going to follow that up with just saying that not only am I concerned that one of those threats is actually going to turn out to be true and cause someone to be injured, I'm also concerned that election officials are seeing so many threats and coming from so many angles that they're almost becoming desensitized to them. And so we are constantly having to remind them to report, because it's almost become such an everyday, no big deal occurrence to them that they don't even think anyone's out there to support them. And if I could make one ask of this group, it would be, when you meet an election official, when you see an election official, let them know that you appreciate the work that they do, because you may not agree with the politics on one side or the other, but that's not the role of an election official. They're here to make sure that election gets carried out and gets carried out to the best of their abilities, and I promise you they're doing that, and they could really use to know that people are out there who support them, because the people that don't support them are very loud, and it can drown out your joy.
Yeah. So super quick, all of this, but like Jerry, my greatest concern right now is deepfakes and in general synthetic content. It's going to increase the quality, quantity, and urgency of dis, and malinformation. You are going to see videos of both candidates saying, doing terrible things, dying right before the election, fake videos, and it will affect how people vote. That is my greatest fear.
Doing this for the last 5 years and being responsible for a wealth of people, everything, all the time, always keeps me up at night. That's part of this life, but it's okay, because I think the anxiety, as long as it's not in a constant state, keeps me on my toes to be better for them every day. So it's okay, I'm still good with it.
So you just stole the word I was going to use, what keeps me up at night, life. But in a specific way. When I'm doing a cybersecurity talk, my very first slide, the very top of the very first slide, and I always tell people every single cybersecurity slide should start with the words, slow down.
No.
If you just slow down a little bit, take a look at what is going on, what are you about to click on, things like that. It's because I'm the one that has to deal with what you click on. That's right. If you click on it, I got to deal with it. And so and every time it's because of life. You know, you're on your phone, you're doing your thing, and pop, and they got us.
Thanks, Sean.
Slow down.
We're running a little low on time, so I want to push this last one. Go ahead.
Yes, sorry, last guy here. My biggest concern is just not being perfect, and that's what we're being asked to do, unfortunately. And even if we are perfect, it doesn't matter. People will still make things up, and we have to spend hours upon hours and upon hours every single week counteracting this amount of information that gets thrown at us all the time. And that is time that we can't officiate elections, which sucks. So as to what other people said in this panel, just life is going to get us, I think, at this point.
Awesome, thanks, everybody. Thanks so much to this panel, not only for being here, but for the incredible work that you do. We would be remiss if we didn't say to you all, if we made this job sound like so much fun, please feel free to look at jobs in our industry. Again, as Ken pointed out, there's a lot of people that are not experienced sort of applying for jobs, and you, just by having security experience, have a lot to say about elections, and so we would really like to encourage you to sort of look at that list and see if one of those jobs might be interesting for you. In closing, I just want to thank you all for attending and being curious and willing to learn more about Arizona elections and how we secure them. We're going to be around today and tomorrow. You've seen our faces. Please feel free to stop by and say hi. We'll try to answer your questions in person. And again, for those people that we didn't get to ask their questions today, know that we will do our best to follow up with you. Thanks so much.
Excellent.
Okay. Yeah, no, I'm actually having a little drink. Keep going to sleep when I'm here.
I feel like that farming belongs to someone they believe in. Just kind of like, I'm almost positive that they're commercial. All right, I'm gonna tell people to get seated. Really appreciate everyone who's here for the next talk. I appreciate everybody from the prior talk. Feel free to take those discussions to the hallway. I support you in the friendliest way possible. Bless you.
And we have 18. Oh, there it is. Oh, okay. Oh, here we go. We'll just do this. Yep, perfect. Uh-oh. That's fine. It's all right. Yeah, all right. Is it to the right? There it is. Cool.
Do you want it to expand, or do you just want to do both of those right now?
I'll be good. Yeah, no, this is. We good? Awesome. All right. Well, hello. Thank you for being here. I'm Ben from KC, which is kind of an ironic joke because I moved out of Kansas City last summer, but the name sticks. And I'm here to talk about, network security in the cloud, or maybe what isn't actually network security anymore and why that's new and different. This talk is really for people who, one of a couple different situations, either you are fired up an AWS account or a cloud account, and you're like, well, I should probably secure this a little bit, what do I do? Or your company is just signed up with AWS. A little over 26 years now. That was cool. See if we can, that's better. All right, and during that time I've split my time pretty much directly between development and infrastructure work. So I spent a long time doing web development and EDI and stuff like that, and then a few years, 10 years back, pivoted over to infrastructure, did that for a long time, and I've been kind of sprinkling security in with that all the time. So I can kind of talk both sides. I have a little bit of perspective to see each of them, and that's really why cloud, your attackers may have all the same access that you do, because your hypervisor sits in your front yard. You don't really have walls anymore. Now, that's not necessarily terrible, because microsegmentation is the default. You actually have a better layer of cloud security, but lateral movement's totally different because it happens at the hypervisor layer and not at the network layer. So if there's one thing from your blue team perspective you have that is kind of physical access-ish, that one thing that attackers should never be able to touch, it's your root account. The root user is the user that you first signed up with on AWS or Azure or whatever. You went and you put in your email address and your credit card number, and that email address became your root user. And that is the closest thing you have to physical access in your cloud environment. It is the one thing that cannot be trumped. It is the one thing that you have to protect at all freaking costs. When you're setting it up, very first thing you want to do is turn on MFA. And in fact, set up 2 different kinds of MFA if you can. AWS now allows this. You can have more than one MFA source for your root account, so you absolutely want to have 2. The next thing to do is create a user in your environment that you can use from day to day that isn't the root user, because you don't ever want to use it again unless you absolutely have to. And the other thing I would love to talk about here, but AWS has correct. You have, wow, I just keep killing this by moving, don't I?
It's my fault here. I'm trying to fix the audio still for the stream.
Oh, no worries.
On the other side too, so.
Yeah, perfect. I thought I was just moving around and like jiggling this cable every time I did it.
No.
Fair enough, okay. So anyways, Amazon will hopefully have a quality way of unlocking this for you. Again, I haven't been through it yet, so I can't tell you exactly what it is. All right, now we're down on both sides. What? That is bizarre. Okay. just your instances, or not just your applications, or not just your network, but you've got to be able to move them outside of your control plane. You have to validate that they're gone from there as well. So when you're looking around and saying, okay, all of my VMs are now safe, and we've dealt with that, and maybe my online Lambda functions are okay, you still have to look at your control plane. Do they have IAM access? Do they have storage access, et cetera? It's a much different thing. In this incident response point, this is where CloudTrail is super important. CloudTrail is an Amazon service that logs every every API call. Foreshadowing, we'll get back to that later. But it is absolutely important because there are a lot of things that will happen outside of your network visibility, outside of any network telemetry you have, outside of your firewalls or your network taps or anything else will never show up there, will only show up as API calls. In an incident, or really just across the cloud in general, credentials are absolute king. Credentials are how people will move laterally and gain persistence. So you need to be, at any given point, ready to rotate them. You should have an inventory of every access key that you have in your environment and where all it's being used, so that you don't have to hesitate before you can pull the trigger to say every one of these things needs to change. That's hard to do. It's hard to do if you're midway through a cloud implementation, so start at the beginning if you can. And if you can't, you can just chain together some CLI commands to at least get your list of keys to start from. But what you can't do is, in the midst of an attack, when some number of these keys may be compromised, is have to sit down and have a discussion with your management about what will it take to rotate them and how are we going to test. That's something you should know ahead of time. So let's talk a little bit, we've been talking about blue team stuff, about what it's like attacking a cloud environment. Not attacking, I'm sorry, authorized pen testing of a cloud environment. The cloud environment, because, again, it's all on the internet, often exposes resources that you don't necessarily mean to expose. There's lots of things that just kind of show up on the internet. And these are also really popular exfiltration techniques. But snapshots of file systems, snapshots of databases. Everybody's heard about S3 blob, or S3 storage and Azure blobs being available. But there's lots of other things. AMIs, machine images, queues, notification systems can all accidentally be made public. It's a really common misconfiguration in Amazon. If you say authenticated users, most people, when they read authenticated users, you're used to your Microsoft environment, you would think, well, that means everybody that's authenticated by my account. That's not actually what it is. That's every user in AWS anywhere in the world suddenly has access to it, and it's not uncommon to see people make that mistake. So when you're doing an authorized pen test on a cloud environment, one of the very first things that you'll want to do is start enumerating these. There's lots of scripts, there's lots of things that can start just enumerating this. Some of it's just DNS based. Every S3 bucket has a DNS name, so you can actually just start enumerating DNS to look for them. I mentioned this is popular for exfiltration. For instance, AMIs. It's very simple to take an EC2 instance, just a Linux machine, load it up with critical data, and then clone it and publish it as an AWI publicly. Now, it's very two web servers sitting next to each other in the same VLAN can't necessarily talk to each other. And in fact, unless you've gone out of your way to configure it, they don't. So instead, you look for access keys. Access keys are the absolute end-all move in the cloud to find access. And the reason of that is a lot of cloud admins are busy, harried, have deadlines that they cannot possibly deal with, and so do not have time to actually configure least privilege effectively. It's extremely difficult to do. It is a necessary step, but it's hard, and so it often doesn't get done. So let's talk about the easiest one of these, and because it is a great glowing example. Amazon has actually taken a few steps now to try and improve this. They've added some speed bumps to it. It's still definitely possible. But this is how you can jump directly out of an application vulnerability or a proxy misconfiguration or even command injection on the box to finding additional access within the environment that you now just have without really being culpable for. What I'm talking about here is the instance metadata service. Now, Amazon and GCP both have kind of something similar, and they are also abusable. I know how to do Microsoft's. I don't know GCP's as well. But we'll start with Amazon because it's definitely the one that people are well aware of. And what it is every instance listens on a non-routable address. That 169.254, 169.254, beyond, like 169.254 is not a routable address block. And so they leverage that to provide this local service to spit out data about the instance. See kind of what these security configurations look like and what AWS is telling you about them, and then maybe a little bit more of the reality. So if I go up here to my S3 buckets, we see we got some buckets configured here, okay? And again, this is demonstration worthy, but it is demonstration type stuff. But if I go look in these buckets, and I go and like look at the permissions, trap that somebody laid for us. So we have here a module called Detect Honey Tokens. Well, how would you detect honey tokens in a cloud environment where it's going to alert as soon as you make an API call? Well, I earlier said CloudTrail logs every API call, asterisk. There's a few things it doesn't log. So what we do is we look for an API call that doesn't log, but does return the full resource name in the error message. And of those, there are a few. Currently, we're using SNS Publish. So what it'll do is it will access that token, pull back all the information about it, and in that information you can tell if it is, because there are specific formats to the way the ARNs are done for the various companies that produce honey tokens, you can immediately see if it is. So what we will do is, did I type it right? I did, look at that. So, from this output, it says, hey, this is not a honey token. And it also gives me the full ARN that I'm dealing with. Tells me, okay, this, I didn't know any of this walking into Paku, tells me what account I'm dealing with, tells me what role these tokens are, tells me that they're legit tokens. This is actually powerful information, so what can we do with it? Well, the very first thing we're going to do, and again, looking at the S3 bucket security may have been foreshadowing, let's see what we can mine out of S3 since that's our target. So to do that, we have do what? After S3 have an extra underscore. That's actually supposed to be there. But I'll have to look and see. Again, I apologize for this part being kind of uneven. I was not expecting to not be able to see. All right. Oh. There we are. All right, now it's going to ask me, do you actually want to download things? And you can see, this is, remember, green checkbox security on these buckets. Every one of them. Public access is denied. But because I have a credential that I found internally, I have all the access I want. And there's all sorts of fun stuff in here. This is crazy. Why would this have access to all of this? Well, the simple answer is it shouldn't. If you're configuring by least privilege, the last thing you should do is give every instance in your environment access to every storage bucket. But it happens all the time. It's unbelievable how often people do that. All right, so we've downloaded a bunch of files. Again, from buckets that were fully secured. Green checkbox security, no public access allowed, and yet here we are. So from those buckets, we have things, we have cardholder data, we have administrative data, we have all sorts of fun stuff. And one thing that I will show you here, I think on some of those we can probably let sleeping dogs lie. If you really want to know, it's a picture of my Jeep. It's not nearly as cool as it sounds. But Paku will store all the loot for you in a specific directory that you set up, basically. Let's see here. But to just pick on one of those, looking in there, this is our secret bucket. What's in the secret bucket? Well, there's admin credentials here. And now we can talk about what admin credentials actually look like. These are those permanent keys I was talking about. AKIA means that they will live forever. Someone has just left them out here. Now, our target, for this authorized pen test was to go get into the S3 bucket. So we're not going to try and go all the way through, plus we're about 4 minutes from end, everything that these keys might have access to. But all of this happened, all of this stuff that you saw me do without any network telemetry showing up. None of this, outside of my initial calls to the application, went over the network that the company internally had defined, because S3 is an internet-facing endpoint. So none of this would have been, the only place this shows up maybe is CloudTrail, and that depends on whether or not you've configured data events. So I've gone out to this environment with green checkbox security approved by Amazon, pulled private data out without hardly any detection. And that is why all of that security gets so wrong these days. Oh yeah, that's right. So that concludes my demonstration. I do want to say thanks, first of all, to everybody here. Cons are a lot of fun, and they don't happen if nobody shows up, so thank you so much for being here. There's a lot of really cool stuff at this con, so thank you for taking your time to come out and watch my talk. I appreciate that for certain. And thanks to CactusCon for putting all this stuff on. This has been fantastic. I want to thank Recon InfoSec. They pay me to do cloud things. If you enjoy talks like this, if you enjoy talking about information security, come and join us on the Thursday Defensive. Happens every Thursday. It's a half-hour long. It's a Zoom meeting. It is a conversation, not a presentation. Lots of very, very smart people hang out on that call, people way smarter than I am, and talk about all things defensive security. So Tim Medine was on there yesterday talking about how offense feeds into defense. So come out and hang out with us for sure. The Cloud Security Alliance, I have no affiliation with, but I do like their training. They do a nice job of helping people understand, like taking kind of that base security knowledge you have and applying it in a cloud context. I also want to shout out to Andrew Krug and Bo Bullock. Andrew and Bo both do training through Anti-Siphon. Andrew does training on the defensive side, Bo does training on the offensive side, and they are both fantastic. I learned more from the first day of either one of their classes than the entire AWS security specialist curriculum. They are very, very informative at a decent price. If you can make the time and can afford it, I highly recommend them. Shout out to Rhino Security Labs because, again, a lot of their products, or I should say their projects, and they've been fantastic to work with. Great tools, open source, they accept contributions from people outside the company, so it's been good stuff for the community in general. And then I have to make a shout out to SetKC. I don't actually live in Kansas City anymore, but that's okay because SetKC is everywhere. Thank you very much, I appreciate it. Okay.
We're nice and close. So yeah, my name is David Bravo. I work as a security consultant at Bishop Fox, and I predominantly hack web apps and cloud environments. I also work on the retained security consulting part of the practice, where I do a lot of work to strategize and create systems to efficiently test large swaths of applications. So yeah, I went to NYU, went to the engineering school there, so if there's any NYU folks out here, hopefully you guys are enjoying the weather. It is much better here than in New York. And I am an Arsenal fan, so Arsenal is a British Premier League team that's like the top tier of British football or soccer. They're recently good. For many years they were not. So it's really, really great to be a fan of Arsenal recently. So yeah, that's a bit about me. Let's talk about AWS Cognito. So AWS Cognito is a service that AWS provides, and it abstracts a lot of functionality related to authentication, authorization, and user management for web and mobile apps. You can, the client or the front end can be basically anything, but it abstracts a lot of that information. You have two main concepts. There are user pools and identity pools. The user pools are mostly in charge of managing the lists of users, providing functionality for signing up, authenticating, and authorizing. And then the identity pool is in charge of functionality that will actually map roles in AWS to the users in user pools. So in the end, both of these combine to basically provide a functionality where you can have authentication, authorization, and provide access to AWS resources through this service. And what I've seen it in practice is often engineers will use this to implement some of this functionality for their application that's already hosted in AWS. So let's say you have a web app or some sort of mobile application with a bunch of server-side functionality. You'll have that in AWS, and then you can leverage AWS Cognito to abstract and sort of like not need to implement and maintain lots of functionality related to authentication, authorization, etc. So yeah, now we're experts in AWS Cognito. Let's take a look at this picture here. So yeah, this is an interesting scenario. I didn't talk about it, but briefly, what's going on here is that an application is authenticating to the user pool, which remember that's sort of like the list of users, and then authentication is happening through a federated way to single sign-on or OIDC or SAML, any way that your company might implement single sign-on. And then you can actually, once you've authenticated that, interact with the identity pool to get tokens or AWS credentials to actually access resources in AWS. So for example, let's say you have functionality in your web application that needs to get data from an S3 bucket or put data in S3 bucket. You can actually provide that authentication and authorization through these components in AWS Cognito. All right, so potential misconfigurations. I say potential here because these configurations don't necessarily mean that it's actually a vulnerability. Everything is dependent on the context of the application, the context of what the application is intended to do, and the impact that you can eventually demonstrate. I work on the offensive side, so a lot of my thinking is always, all right, how can this configuration or these sets of this implementation lead to some demonstrable impact in the application? So let's talk about the first one, self-registration. You could think of this as like a self-sign-up, or let's say you're signing up a new user on your application. If your application is supposed to allow people to come and sign up, then yeah, that's fine. That's not a big deal. But let's say you are using AWS Cognito to present or protect an administrative panel. And if you have self-registration enabled, then in that scenario, anyone who visits the administration panel could go sign up and access the administration panel, and that might be a vulnerability for that particular context. Then modifiable user attributes. So in this case, you can think of this as key value pairs that may have some significance in your application. Where I've seen this used with an impact is usually where the key is maybe a role, for example, and then the value might be a user role or admin role. And then the application will actually use that value to determine what the user has access to. And now if you allow this to be modifiable, then a user can log in or register and then change their role to admin, and potentially you have a privilege escalation scenario there. And then finally, you have the exposure of a client secret. So this client secret, sometimes it will be super secret sauce, oftentimes probably not, but basically it's a little bit outside of the scope of the presentation as to where and how this value is generated and how it's used. But at a high level, how you can think of this secret is that it is a credential or a secret value that's necessary to interact with different services that are associated with AWS Cognito. So for example, AWS also sells a service that's kind of like an elk stack. So you have Kibana, Logstash, I think Elasticache, all kind of like in one thing, and you could link it to AWS Cognito so that you can actually protect or have that sort of login authentication with the elk stack. And so that elk stack or that application has a client secret, and that client secret is necessary for whenever AWS Cognito is interacting with it. Now, if this is exposed in a front-end asset, then suddenly maybe an unintended user or someone who is just accessing or browsing the application could leverage this and in unintended ways interact with the application, the elk stack in that scenario. All right. So let's talk about exploiting it. So actually like what you would type in the command line, what values you would be looking for, thinking about how this actually goes down in practice. So let's say you are assessing an application, you have burp up, you have your proxy, and you see some traffic going to a domain that looks something like amazoncognito.com. You'll see in that traffic a value that will probably be something like client ID or client underscore ID, all caps client ID, and this client ID is an ID associated with the user pool. And so let's say that user pool has self-registration enabled. You can actually, just without any authentication, go and use that client ID and provide a username and a password. And sometimes you'll need other attributes as well, like an email or maybe something else, a role, for example. And then you go in and you register your user, and now you've signed up. An interesting thing here is that when you sign up, you actually have to confirm the user. So that's why that email part or like maybe a phone number will be part of the attributes that you provide when you're signing up. And so then you sign up, you confirm the user, and then finally you can log in. And then when you log in, you can retrieve a token. Yes, you basically just retrieve a token, and that's your authentication token to the application. So now, once you have that authentication token, you're authenticated to the user pool, but to get some sort of impact or to do something with the application, you may be able to interact with it and that was unexpected. But ideally, what I'm thinking when I'm doing this is like, how can I get a foothold in the AWS environment now from this token and actually go play around with with the resources in there, hopefully get to some privilege escalation or some type of sensitive information. So I'll talk about what identity pools are in a moment as well in some configurations. At a high level, remember, identity pools are that component of AWS Cognito that will map permissions in the AWS environment to users who are authenticated to the user pools. Basically lets users interact with stuff in AWS. So we have our token, we've logged in. Now we can actually interact with the identity pool to retrieve AWS credentials for an authenticated user. A prerequisite for this is the identity pool ID. Similarly to what I was talking about with the client ID, where you'll see it in traffic, an identity pool ID is also something that you'll probably see in traffic. Look for identity pool ID, identity ID. These sorts of values are necessary to interact with the service, so you'll probably see it. And then you could type in something like this. Always refer to the docs as well. I think even like a year ago or 2 years ago, they changed some of the names of AWS Cognito, so definitely refer to the docs, but the concept should be the same. You use that token and the identity ID to get AWS credentials, and then now you have a foothold in the AWS environment. Cool. Exploiting modifiable user attributes. So remember that concept before that I was talking about where you can have custom attributes for users in that user pool. You could think of it as like a role or anything. But let's use the example of a role. If I create a user and my role is user, but then the user pool allows me to modify the value of that role, then you have a scenario where you can escalate, you may be able to escalate privileges and do some unintended actions in the application. And so, as you see here, this is sort of an example command that you could write. And what this will do is modify your user attributes. When you re-authenticate or as you authenticate to the application, you will then be, you could be an admin then. This is, of course, with a bunch of assumptions, but that's the general idea of how you can exploit something like this. The exposure of the client secret. So this is that client secret that I was talking about that has to do with the application that would integrate with AWS Cognito. And that client secret is usually generated and sort of associated and necessary whenever you want to interact with that application. This is sometimes found in the front-end asset, and let's say and it is a credential. So when this is exposed, you can basically include this in some of the examples that I just showed you before, where you're exploiting self-sign-up or you're exploiting the modifiable user attributes, and you're actually interacting with the AWS service, AWS Cognito service, in unintended ways, getting access to it, and then maybe you can demonstrate some significant impact there. All right, so misconfigurations and identity pools. So that was the user pools. You could think of it almost kind of like as a user table, the authentication, the authorization to the user table. Now, the identity pools is focused on letting the users in the user pool access resources in an AWS account. A critical component of this is, of course, the IAM roles that you're using and the policies that you're describing. And again, I say potential because in some of these examples, they are not necessarily security vulnerabilities if they're configured in this way. Everything depends on the impact. Everything, rather on the context. Everything depends on what the application should be doing. So this first one is a relatively straightforward one, unauthenticated access. Basically, you can say, if you have the ID or sort of like my name, you can interact with me and I will give you access to the AWS account with the role that was assigned to an unauthenticated user. Depending on what policies are assigned to that unauthenticated user, there could be varying amounts of impact, but that's one example. So next, overly permissive IAM roles. This is a pretty critical part whenever you're assessing or trying to hack into AWS environments. And basically what you're looking for here as an attacker or maybe security engineer, hopefully also as an engineer, is looking where have these policies been implemented where they're very overly permissive. So assessing this is totally related to the identity pools as well. Then you have the exposure of the identity ID. This is not necessarily a big deal, I'd say, but it is something that when I'm assessing AWS Cognito or I'm mentoring someone who's assessing AWS Cognito and they find it, I'm telling them, okay, look for this value. See how you can escalate, see how you can access it, and hopefully you can demonstrate some impact there. So if possible, it would be nice to abstract it into the back end, but it's not necessary. It's not necessary. All right, exploiting the unauthenticated access. This one is relatively simple. As I said, you'll usually be interacting with a web application, or maybe you have source code, and you find something that looks like an identity pool ID or identity ID. These are not interchangeable, but as at a high level, you can think of it as an ID that is associated with the identity pool. And once you find it, if unauthenticated access is enabled, you can actually use that value to retrieve AWS credentials for the unauthenticated role, and then depending on what policies are associated to that role, you can do things in the AWS account. Hopefully you have some overly permissive policies assigned and you can demonstrate some impact. Or if you're an engineer, hopefully you don't have overly permissive policies assigned there. And yeah, so this is something I actually saw in the real world. This was a situation where it wasn't necessarily an unauthenticated user having these sets of permissions, but it was rather an authenticated user. So just a user who logs in regularly to the application had a ridiculous amount of permissions in the AWS account. And from here, we actually escalated privileges to own the AWS account. And so one of the core parts of that vulnerability or that chain of attacks was this overly permissive role in the AWS associated with the role in that AWS Cognito implementation. So assessing the IAM roles is always critical in any AWS penetration test, but also like security assessment. And then for Cognito, you still have to be really, really careful as to what you're assigning your authenticated users. And lastly, the exposure of the identity pool ID. Again, I don't think this is a huge deal or necessarily a security vulnerability, but if you can, it would be nice for an attacker to not see it unless absolutely necessary. And so you can put it abstracted in the back end somewhere and not necessarily expose it to the front end assets or the users there. All right, that was that. So preventing issues in Cognito. Again, I usually work on the offensive side. So this is something that I would recommend to the engineers. And kind of like how I think of this checklist is, if it's not necessary, just remove it or disable it, but it always depends on the context of the application. So let's say you have an application that doesn't need users to sign up new users. It doesn't need external people to create new users. Disable self-registration, or I think in that case it's don't enable it. For attributes that you assign to users and user pools, make sure you make the attributes immutable if you don't want them to be mutable. Also, conducting an analysis as to what assumptions your application is making of those attributes is useful, because let's say one engineering team decides, yes, they should be mutable because of this. Another engineering team could have completely different assumptions, and you may wind up with some unexpected vulnerabilities there. Lastly, disabling guest access in identity pools. So let's say you have an identity pool and it doesn't need, or it doesn't have a good business use case for users to interact with it without authentication, without unauthenticated. Make sure you disable that. If there's no good reason to have these features in, just try to disable them. And then as well, defining least privilege IAM policies everywhere. This is, I think, applicable to almost anything in AWS. A lot of times, engineers will sort of make it work first and then do security. But then if it gets released to production in between that, you find yourself in a lot of situations where the IAM policies are not least privilege and often end up opening the risk of vulnerability and an exploit there. And then finally, limiting exposure of the configuration IDs. So this is information that may not necessarily need to be in the front-end assets or exposed to users. So you could put it in the back end and sort of hide it a little bit. But again, it's not a huge thing, just something to consider. Okay. Resources. So I didn't invent this. I didn't invent a lot of the information here. This is sort of an aggregation of information that I found useful when sort of learning about this service a few years ago, and things that have helped me create documentation or help others exploit it myself. And yeah, on the top here is the associated blog post with the lab that I was referring to at the beginning. I don't know how to pronounce that. Doyensek? Doyensek? All right. Well, I didn't do too bad my first time. There we go. So yeah, Doyensek has a cool Cognito lab that will sort of walk you through how to actually exploit some of the those instances where user attributes are mutable when they should be immutable. This third paper I really like because it's sort of like a, yeah, as it says, a super large scale analysis of some of those unauthenticated identity pools, and it shows some really, really interesting impact there. It's kind of old now, yeah, 2019. But yeah, I won't go through all of them. Definitely always refer to the docs. Super useful, as I said before, things change. The naming conventions have changed as well in the past 2 years. So always refer to those docs. And that's it. Hopefully that's helpful. I'm not really big on social media, so I just have LinkedIn. You can message me, and I will do my best to get back to you. But yeah, that's it.
Do you have any questions?
Yeah, does anybody have any general questions?
Discord didn't have it.
Yeah,
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
fantastic.
Thank you,
Yeah.
David.
Yep, yep.